Good morning, SBC guys. It is early Saturday morning. We should be setting up for our men's rise this morning. Several guys usually come in and get breakfast started. Bill is usually steady at work by now, and he's got his recruits that are helping him put things together for our 9 a.m. Gathering. And we're not going to have that this morning. So in a time where there's so much uncertainty, in a time where our lives have been radically shifted over the last 7, 8, 9 days, and for some of you who are facing some significant financial challenges in the days and weeks to come because of work that has changed on you, for others who are dealing with kids at home and trying to figure out schedule around those types of things. For others of you who are watching the markets and deeply concerned about your long-term stability because of the financial picture, or maybe even concerned about loved ones who could find themselves falling ill to this virus that's been spreading. There's so much to be concerned about. There's so much that has been facing us, and I could never have imagined 10 days ago things looking like they do today. I could never imagine 5 days ago things looking as they do now. But I do want to spend a few minutes with you this morning offering some encouragement and maybe some perspective on some of this. Again, I would love to have the opportunity to do this collectively, to hear your heart directly and to have you share with other men what you're experiencing, and then to be able to pray for one another and to be able to pray for God to use us in a significant way to bring encouragement into our individual environments. That is something that I just think is such a unique opportunity that we have right now, but at the same time, we have to limit our connectivity. Social distancing is maybe one of the terms that all of us have discovered maybe for the first time. I had never really even heard that phraseology, at least in a good way. I'd never heard that phraseology before. But I want to put our hearts postured in a direction this morning and encourage you to think about some things together. As I kind of looked at this coronavirus pandemic 2020, or otherwise known as the great toilet paper shortage of the 21st century, we find ourselves dealing with some interesting challenges on top of everything else that would be much more obvious during this time. I can encourage you with this. It's been said well that a fearful world is in desperate need of a fearless church. And as I think about the way in which that should look, I think there's three things that I want to call our attention to on the outset. The first is that the world is fearful. The world is fearful because there's so much that is out of control. There are so many things that are spreading that we're not even sure how to make sense out of. We're not even sure the extent of at this point. The numbers continue to tick up. We watch those things every day, and we have projections that are out there that who knows what that's going to actually look like in a few weeks, maybe a couple of months. And so we find ourselves wrestling with some of those things. But I want to establish kind of three major talking points. One is that the world is fearful because there is so much that we don't know, and there's things that are have concerned us, and now we're finding an intensifying of some of those same basic things where markets are in upheaval, restrictions are being put on us, work environments are changing. Several of you I know are out of work right now. There is much to be concerned about, and so the world at large is fearful. The reality is that in the midst of that, Jesus is still faithful. That Jesus is faithful to care for, to be present in the midst of, to be working in ways that we can't see. We talked earlier this week in one of the videos about the fact that because we walk by faith, not by sight, if we assume that all that we see is all that there is to see, then we fail to see all that there is that needs to be seen. If we assume that all that we see is all there is to be seen, then we fail to recognize that we're not seeing everything that needs to be seen, because Jesus is faithful in this. And as Jesus followers, we serve a faithful God, and that Jesus is continually faithful in this. And so the world is fearful. Jesus is faithful. And as a result, his followers should be fearless. That we have no reason to be afraid. That while there are things to be concerned about, and while there are things we need to be responsible for, Jesus is faithful. Therefore, his followers should be fearless. And we recognize that there's some challenges ahead, and we don't even know the full extent of where this is going to go. I've spent many hours of every day just trying to sort out how do we respond in the moment, in the immediacy of this. How do we respond missionally as people of God that should be fearless because we know who's in control, and we know that he has purposes and plans, that this is not just chaos for the sake of chaos, that chaos and upheaval do not come from God, that order and providence and grace come from his hand. And so in the midst of these things, we find ourselves grappling with questions and tough challenges that we know are a reality for us. I was reminded this week of the moment where Moses, having been told by God that he's not going to enter the promised land. And so you have Moses who, as a result of his sin and striking the rock when he was told to speak to the rock, finds himself now no longer able to lead the people forward into the promised land. This is the man who led the people out of Egypt. This is the man who stood before Pharaoh time and again and again. This is the man who, as he led his people out of Egypt, he led them across the Red Sea. And then he led them to the precipice of the promised land, and then the people decided to not go in, and so then he led them successfully for 40 plus years in the wilderness. And in that time, many died, and there was a major shift in the nation of Israel. And then he comes to now the edge of the promised land once again, and he has to tell his people that he is not going to be the one to take them forward. He has to get in front of them and communicate to them what the succession plan is, and how it is that God is going to work now after all that has transpired. And he, in his short presentation, he goes on to do more about the presentation of the law after this. But in that initial presentation before the people and with Joshua, who will be his successor, he shares some things that I think are fascinating. He shares some things that I think are incredibly helpful to us. He says this in Deuteronomy chapter 31. Then Moses went out and spoke these words to all Israel. I am now 120 years old, and I am no longer able to lead you. The Lord has said to me, you shall not cross the Jordan. And the Jordan obviously was right on the edge of the promised land. The Lord, your God himself, will cross over ahead of you. He will destroy these nations before you, and you will take possession of their land. Joshua will cross over ahead of you, as the Lord said, and the Lord will do to them what he did to Sihon and Og, the kings of the Amorites, whom he destroyed along with their land. He says, I'm not going with you. The Lord will cross over before you. Joshua will go on ahead of you. You will not see me with you going forward. But God will be faithful in the same way he has already been faithful. He reminds them of the defeats that have already happened going into this and the victories that they've already experienced. And then verse 5, the Lord will deliver them to you. And you must do to them all that I have commanded you, that your job is to go in and take the land, possess the land, and to deal with the enemies that will be in the land, and God will be faithful in that. And then he says, verse 6, be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or terrified because of them. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or terrified because of them. I love that phraseology, be strong, certain, confident, courageous, overcoming whatever fears you may face. Do not be afraid or terrified because of them. There are those giants are still there. Those obstacles are still there. But do not allow them to bring terror. Do not allow them to stifle, to in any way inhibit what it is that you're being commanded to do. And it says, He will never leave you nor forsake you. For the Lord your God goes with you, and He will never leave you nor forsake you. That there will be reasons to be concerned. There will be fears that you will face. To not allow those fears to overwhelm you and to move forward, because the Lord is with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. He won't leave you nor turn His back on you. Verse 7, Then Moses summoned Joshua and said to him in the presence of all of Israel, Be strong and courageous, for you must go with this people into the land that the Lord swore to their ancestors to give them, and you must divide it among them as in their inheritance. The Lord Himself goes before you, and will be with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. Joshua, you need to go forward, and you need to help administer the allocation of the land to the people as you possess this land. But to know that the Lord Himself goes before you and will be with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. We find ourselves in moments in life where there is so much out of our control. And it reminds us just how little control we have anyway. We have an illusion of control that we do life with most days, and then we find ourselves facing situations where we are not in control. In this situation, we find occasions where I keep trying to scratch my face, and I know I'm not supposed to, trying to be careful with that. We find ourselves facing circumstances where we are guys. We have a problem. We want to face that problem. We want to confront that problem. We want to go after it and to stand in resistance to whatever that problem is. The series we've been in together is Fight, winning the battles that matter most. And we've talked about fighting and being direct and being assertive when we need to be. And then we face a pandemic like this where we're told to stay in our homes, to isolate, to social distance, to protect ourselves by essentially hiding in some respects. And it's such a counterintuitive thing. It's such a weird phenomenon. It doesn't sit well, especially with that protective part of me that wants to guard and protect the people that I care about, the people that I love. I want to be out doing something, and I find myself being told to step back, to be cautious, and to not gather, and to not go and be with the people that I care about the most. This is a weird set of circumstances. And yet Moses' words still ring true. In fact, I would dare say they ring true in very special, unique ways during this time. That while there are things that will concern us, and there are reasons why we would have potential fears surface in us, that we are not to be terrified, that we are to be courageous, but not courageous because somehow we can figure this out on our own, or we can find the inner strength, but courageous because God is faithful, that the Lord is with us. He will neither leave us nor forsake us, that He is walking with us in the midst of this uncertainty. He is walking with us in the midst of these challenges. Gentlemen, I empathize deeply with the concerns that you have about the financial well-being of your family. I empathize greatly with the concerns that you have about how this virus may affect people that you deeply care about and love. I've been on the phone with my parents multiple times this week, just checking in on them, wanting to see how they're doing, making sure that they're protected, that they're isolating as they should be, that we want to protect our kids, that we want to provide for them. We also want to reassure them. And I would dare say, if we understand that the world is fearful, that Jesus is faithful, and that we are then to be fearless, that should show up in some very specific ways, that we need to showcase that. One of the ways that we need to showcase that is by declaring the certainty that we have. There are things that are certain when so much is uncertain. When so much is out of our control, there are things that we have the ability to be certain about. We are certain that this has not surprised God. We are certain that God is working in the midst of this. We are certain that God has a purpose and a plan of allowing these things to transpire as they are. And we are certain that in that plan, he is working things in a way that will provide outcomes that transcend, that go far beyond what we would potentially anticipate. It's amazing to think about an American culture that has become so consumeristic, that has become so individualistic, now finding itself desperate for connection, desperate for community, and prioritizing things much differently than they had been prior to this. To find ourselves wanting to be able to gather when gathering has oftentimes become far less of a significant or a priority for us. To find ourselves dealing with things that we've been deprived of and now having a greater appreciation for those things because we've been deprived of them. To find ourselves able to empathize with those that go without or those that feel exposed or incredibly vulnerable because we find ourselves feeling in similar ways to those that carry this experience with them each and every day of their lives. There's so much that God is doing that I think can shape our hearts in the right way. But being certain of those things, being certain of God's goodness, of his love, of his promise, and then being able to speak, to declare, to allow that certainty to penetrate our hearts, and then to be able to share that certainty with our kids, with our wives, with our loved ones, and to be able to operate in light of that certainty. I think the second is calmness. I think we've got to have a calm presentation. If we truly are to be fearless, if we truly are to believe that God is with us, that we are not on our own, that he will neither leave us nor forsake us, that we are not having to just figure this out on our own, and we're forced to confront this independent of any of his divine presence. If we truly understand that we walk by faith and not by sight, that there should be a calmness that comes over us. For some of us, there's a nervous energy that it just is so often present when we step into rooms or we walk into conversations. That nervous energy needs to give way to a calmness and the recognition that people are watching, that our kids want to know, that those that we care about need to see us calm in the face of this. That the anger that sometimes surfaces because we are fearful, and so fear then drives that anger. We're concerned about the future, and so we get agitated easily. We're emotionally exhausted, and so that lack of calm then begins to show up in so many different ways. Guys, if we are certain of God's goodness, of his providence, of his presence, then there should be a calmness that kind of showcases itself in how we operate. And then that calmness would also have the ability to have a confidence about it. That we would be able to project confidence, a confidence that doesn't come from us figuring out and picking ourselves up by our own bootstraps and having a plan and finding our way through this on our own, but a confidence that comes from knowing that in God's providence and in God's presence, that he will offer us the grace that we need so that we can experience him in profoundly significant ways and be looking for ways to help our families and those that we care about be able to have that same certainty, to speak to that same certainty. In just a moment, I'll give you some of the passages of Scripture that I've been reading over and over again, and I've referenced some of them in some of these video presentations. But that certainty needs to come from the truth that we have about who God is in the midst of whatever the circumstances. That simply the presence of problems should never be mistaken for the absence of God and his providence. That we do have problems, but he is still faithful in that. And so we would walk with certainty, that we would showcase a calmness, and then that we would have an inner confidence that would be able to project itself in the way that we operate day in and day out. Certainty, calmness, and confidence. Gentlemen, if we're going to fight the battles that fight and win the battles that matter most, there are times where that fighting becomes very assertive and directive. There's other times that those battles that we fight look differently. But the reality is that confidence, that calmness, that certainty, needs to personify, needs to be showcased, needs to characterize how it is that we operate in these things. I so deeply appreciate Moses' words of encouragement to go forward, that I will not be coming with you, but God is with you, that he is faithful, to not to be terrified, to not to be fearful, but to be confident, to be courageous, knowing that God will go before us and that God has a purpose and a plan in these things. This is a sheet of paper that I've been had kind of printed out some verses, and I just want to give you a couple of them. These are verses I've been reading throughout the week over and over and over again. One is the Psalm 46 passage. I just printed off the first 3 verses to kind of just remind myself over and over again. God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear, though the earth give way and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, and the mountains quake with their surging. The reminder that no matter what happens, God is our refuge and our strength. Psalm 27, 13 and 14. I will remain confident of this. I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Wait for the Lord. Be strong and take heart, and wait for the Lord. That there's a patient resilience that must be present in these things. Romans 8, 31 through 39 would be an incredible passage to invite our kids into our family time together, to share and to read to one another. Isaiah 26 I referenced yesterday in a teaching. You will keep in perfect peace those whose minds are steadfast because they trust in you. Trust in the Lord forever, for the Lord himself, is the rock eternal. Gentlemen, I encourage you to use Scripture as a foundation for your confidence, to allow Scripture to give you a certainty, and then to allow that certainty and that confidence to present itself as calmness. We have a world around us. We have so many around us that are anxious, that feel like things are just chaotic, that feel that upheaval, and they have this nervous energy, and there's this incredible worry and incredible angst that is being experienced. If we are to be the people of God, and we are to recognize that Jesus has drawn near to us, that he has invited us in to fellowship, that he has done something for us so that we will never walk alone, and that we, in our relationship with God, have the privilege of doing life together with him and with one another during this time in a world that is fearful, to remember that Jesus is faithful, and that his children, then his people, have opportunity to be fearless in the face of those things, and that fearlessness should sow itself as certainty, as calmness, and as confidence. Gentlemen, I love you. I am so grateful for the privilege of being your pastor. You are missed. I am missing this time with you this morning, but I hope these words are an encouragement to you. May God remind you in those quiet moments, in those moments where you lay your head on your pillow, or you wake up in the morning, or you're in the shower, or you're having lulls in the activity. May he remind you of his love for you. May he remind you of his goodness. And may you experience the certainty, the confidence, and the calmness that comes in light of who our God is, what he has done, and what he is doing in the midst of the seeming chaos that swirls, because that chaos is not all there is. He is doing something beyond that. And we see and experience him in profoundly significant ways as we anticipate what is on the other side, what he will yet do, and how our world may be different, and how he may actually bring transformation into our lives, into the lives of our families, into our community, in powerful, significant ways, even in the midst of this turmoil. Gentlemen, I love you. May God bless you. May his face shine on you, and may he give you rest as you traverse today and tomorrow and in the weeks to come. And I look forward with great anticipation of the day we have a chance to regather together. God bless you, my brothers. We will talk again soon.